but we're also gravely concerned about the settlements and the evictions of Palestinians.
At least 30 Palestinians have been killed and hundreds more wounded following airstrikes and attacks by the extremist Israeli government on civilians in the occupied territories. Now, in this video, I will go over the Canadian reaction to this, including Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the other parties as well. And Trudeau's response, just to kind of spoil it here, it's completely inadequate, but surprisingly moving in the right direction. So I'll get to that video in a minute here. First, let me give you just a quick overview on what is going on. So at least 30 Palestinians, including 10 children and 3 Israelis, have been killed as tensions in Jerusalem spread Tuesday, with Israeli airstrikes flattening a multi-story apartment building in Gaza and rockets fired from the Gaza Strip reaching Tel Aviv. So once again, every event like this, it's the Israeli government doing the most amount of damage. Israel has what is called the Iron Dome. They're able to protect themselves from rockets that are coming in. So most of these rockets were intercepted, never actually hit anything. A few of them are, I guess, 1 or 2 got through, killed a few or 3 Israelis. But for the most part here, the damage and the instigating is being done by this extremist Israeli government that is continuing to oppress Palestinians in a variety of ways. Now, showing you here some of the images of one of the buildings at least that were hit. You can see this one looks like it's toppling over. People live in these buildings. Now, sometimes there are warnings ahead of time so that civilians can try and get out of the area, but still, even when they do, Palestinians end up being killed because of the level of destruction that the Israeli government creates here. From New Republic here, Israeli security forces spent the weekend beating and arresting Palestinian worshippers at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. Coming late in the holy month of Ramadan, these attacks featuring batons, tear gas, stun grenades, and other weapons, and which followed the deadly shooting of a 16-year-old Palestinian boy in the West Bank by Israeli forces, have been widely broadcast on social media. Videos show terrified barefoot worshippers rushing toward exits and children being pushed around by well-armored police. Hundreds of Palestinians have been hospitalized. So this is the event that sparked the reaction from Hamas, sending the rockets into Tel Aviv. And ultimately, then Israel responded with brutal force, killing, as I discussed, 30 Palestinians, including 10 children. Now, so behind all of this, maybe I'll get to more on this after the video of Trudeau, but behind all of this are the evictions that are going on. And they're not really evictions. They are, because they're illegal. These are not, it's not a legal process. These are illegal evictions. It's essentially ethnic cleansing, the Israeli government trying to remove Palestinians from their own land. So the UN tweeting out here, Secretary General expresses his deep concern over continuing violence in occupied East Jerusalem. He urges Israel to cease demolitions and evictions in line with its obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law. So the UN here correctly recognizing and pointing out, as they often do, that it's the Israeli government here that is at fault. And there is very little coverage of this in general in the West because of the alliance that the West has with Israel. So they overlook this humanitarian crisis as a way to continue relations with Israel, instead of using their power, using that relationship to put pressure on Israel to stop oppressing Palestinians. But I'll get to more on that in a minute here. Let's get to Trudeau's reaction. So again, I found this a bit surprising, but ultimately it, of course, does not go far enough. But here, check it out.
I want to ask you about what's happening in the Middle East. So Canada's policy on Israel and Palestine is predicated on the existence of the Oslo peace process. A lot of experts say that process has been dead for years and doesn't reflect the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is renewed tensions. So with that in mind, what do you say to what we are seeing in Jerusalem as well as in Gaza? The exchange of rockets and airstrikes in which 9 children are among the casualties.
The violence and deaths we've seen in Israel right now and in the region are terrible. There needs to be de-escalation immediately. We need to see a cessation of violence and attacks. The rocket attacks from Hamas are absolutely unacceptable. But we're also gravely concerned about the settlements and the evictions of Palestinians. We need to see a return to conversations and dialogue and de-escalation, an end to the violence, including the violence at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which are just heart-wrenching. We need to see a path towards a two-state solution through negotiated conversations. Any unilateral, unhelpful actions on either sides are not contributing to the kind of future we all need to see.
So, a bit of a surprising reaction here, actually calling out at least some of the Israeli government's human rights abuses, including the illegal evictions. So, and the actions taken at the mosque. So, I'm not impressed, but I'm surprised. At the same time, there is no meat on this bone. So these are just words. There's nothing behind it. As Sam Hirsch here tweeted out, to be honest, not calling for an arms embargo and sanctions on Israel at this point is irresponsible government policy. So this is what the Canadian government should be doing. I'll get to a tweet in a second from an NDP MP that calls that out specifically in terms of the numbers. But this is exactly what the Canadian government should be doing. It can't just be words. It can't just be acknowledging what the Israeli government is doing against Palestinians. There has to be some action behind it so that you can use your power as an ally to put pressure on Israel. Now, a little more on Sheikh Jarrah. So this is, or Sheikh Jarrah. My pronunciations, by the way, are going to be wrong all over this. just letting you know. But this is one of the occupied, or one of the areas where the Israeli government is trying to push out Palestinians who have lived there their entire lives. And this is part of what Trudeau called out there. So just to give you a little more on this, Sheikh Jarrah is now practically a war zone as armed Israeli settlers under the protection of Israeli police terrorize the Palestinian residents. These are the very settlers who are looking to kick out families, including Al-Kurds. Al-Kurd is someone mentioned in this Washington Post piece. More on this from MSNBC. Meanwhile, the Israeli government has thrown up endless roadblocks against new Palestinian construction in the occupied territories. For decades, applications for Israeli permits to build homes on Palestinian-owned land have been rejected with little reason given, making them nearly impossible for Palestinians to obtain, according to the United Nations. That's not the case for Israelis and Jewish settlers wishing to build in Jerusalem. Quote, only 7% of the building permits used in Jerusalem over the past few years have gone to Palestinian neighborhoods where 40% of the city's population lives, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported in 2015. So this is sort of an overview in terms of what is going on in terms of the Israeli government pushing out Palestinians and trying to claim land that is not theirs again and again and again, and have been doing this for decades now. Now let's get to some other leaders' reactions. So there may be, understand here, this is a evolving story, so there may be a new response from Jagmeet Singh by the time I post this, but this is to the initial, what was happening over the weekend with the Israeli government going into the mosque there. So Jagmeet Singh reacted saying the threatened evictions of Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah of East Jerusalem during the holy month of Ramadan or any other day is deeply troubling. Illegal occupation, demolitions, and forced evictions must end. PM Trudeau must take a stand and uphold international law. And keep in mind, this came before Trudeau's statement. It's possible that Jagmeet Singh, his wording here, potentially influenced Trudeau and how he reacted to this story as well. Nikki Ashton, also an NDP MP, saying horrifying. Canada must step up as must other countries. Palestinian children are paying the ultimate price of the world's complicity in Israeli state violence. Matthew Green here, pointing out what I wanted to discuss, what I mentioned earlier. Canada must suspend military exports to Israel. # Gaza under attack. So you see here, in terms of our military exports, they go to Israel for the most part. So 17.5%, and the UK 14.27%, Germany, France, Australia, Switzerland. But the amount of support that the Israeli government receives from both Canada and also the US while all of this is going on, is just despicable. And if you're going to, as a government, if you're going to correctly recognize what the Israeli government is doing to Palestinians, you have to put some real meat behind it and threaten to withdraw this kind of support. Green Party here with a horrible two sides approach, but I will give you a surprising response from another Green MP to this. But the Green Party of Canada official account here is saying, the Green Party of Canada calls for an immediate de-escalation in the violence and a return to dialogue as a means to seeking a peaceful solution. Quote, violence and confrontation will not bring resolution, only more suffering. It is a very, if you read the full statement, which is only, I think, like 2 paragraphs, it is a very, 3 paragraphs. It's a very basic, both sides response. Doesn't directly mention the Israeli government occupying the Palestinians, doesn't mention taking over, them pushing out Palestinians from their own land, doesn't mention the attack on the doesn't mention anything. It's a very both sides response. Very disappointing here from the Green Party leader, but also not surprising considering I covered this Green Party leadership race, and it was clear the entire time that Annamie Paul, this was not an issue that she was educated on or didn't care to be educated on, or is educated on and doesn't care ultimately about Palestinian life. Whatever it is, clearly the Green Party here is not at all good on this issue. But after I get to this reaction, so this is from the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East account here. The statement is worse than expected. It does not mention the forced evictions in Sheikh Jarrah. It does not mention Israel's violent assault on Al-Aqsa. It does not mention the children in Gaza murdered in airstrikes. We expect a far higher standard from the Canadian Greens. You have here a response to that criticism from one of the few Green MPs that exist. So Jenica Atwin here saying it is a totally inadequate statement. Forced evictions must end. I stand with Palestine and condemn the unthinkable airstrikes in Gaza. End apartheid. Hashtag save Sheikh Jarrah. Amazing. This is amazing. To see a sitting Green MP, and again, I think I'm losing track now. I think there's 3 of them. 2 or 3, but I think it's 3. But you have here one of them actually calling out their own leader. So this is fantastic. You really don't see this in any other party, and this is part of the reason why I ran as a Green Party candidate when I ran for office. And for office, is that the right terminology for Canadian? I don't know, but that's when I ran to become an MP. It's because one of the things that the Green Party promotes, at least at the time, was that you can sort of have your own positions, at least on certain issues. And this was one of the areas where I was glad to be able to have my own viewpoints on, because oftentimes all 5 major Canadian parties are not good on this issue. So this is one of these issues where I was happy to be able to have my own opinion, and it looks here like this Green MP is happy to showcase that. So good on Jenica Atwin here for this statement. Now, of course, we get to the worst of the worst. Canadian Conservative leader Erin O'Toole tweeting out, Canada's Conservatives strongly condemn the frightening campaign of rocket attacks by Hamas. These terrorist attacks are indiscriminately targeting civilians and have already taken innocent lives. They must end immediately. Read my full statement. What the hell? I'm laughing because this is so ridiculous. It's what you expect from the Conservative Party, but my God, no recognition at all in terms of what the Israeli government has been doing this entire time, for decades what they've been doing, but also in this situation, in this event, what they've been doing. Yeah, obviously a ridiculous statement from Erin O'Toole. And speaking of Hamas, I'm going to leave you here with 2 resources. So some homework here if you care to educate yourself. This link here, fantastic quick video breaking down how, let me just read this. Israel lost every right to blame Hamas for anything when they spent decades funding it to undermine secular Palestinian opposition. Every post about any attack from Hamas should be replied to with this video. So this is from The Intercept. Mehdi Hassan here goes over how the Israeli government funded and supported Hamas as a way to undermine secular Palestinian opposition. So you can't now blame Hamas after you're the ones that funded them and made them into what they are today. And again, comparing the rocket launches from Hamas to the Israeli government, I mean, there's no comparison there. But even if you want to criticize Hamas, which is fine, criticize Hamas for shooting out rockets, understand that they exist because of the Israeli government. Last resource here that I will leave you with, again, links below the video in the description box on YouTube. This Jagmeet article. Israel has effectively made the establishment of a separate Palestinian state impossible. It's clear what's needed now, a single democratic state with full rights for all people. So I will link to this article as well. Read through this. This is in response to what Trudeau mentioned there at the end of his clip discussing how there needs to be a two-state solution. It's too late for that now. The amount of land that the Israeli government has taken from Palestinians, there is no space now for a two-state solution. So a single state, democratic state with full rights for all people makes the most sense. Obviously that also comes with its own issues, but that said, read through the article here for a better understanding of that position. And ultimately here, I'm hoping, I always have a little optimism in me occasionally, but seeing Trudeau's reaction here gives me some hope that there is space to move on this issue. When it becomes so obvious, when you see the buildings on fire, when you see the amount of destruction from the Israeli government, and you compare that to Palestinians, there is no comparison there. And on top of that, as I've said a million times, Israel is they are the oppressors. They're the ones controlling the occupied territories. There is one aggressor here, and that aggressor is Israel.